Hi. Hi, everyone. Great to be back here. And by back here, I mean this was what my life looked like. I used to live about 1 kilometer up the hill here in Zolln, very nice area. This is what it looked like about a year ago today. This is all of my stuff. After 12 years of living here in München, I never thought that I would go back to where I came from, which is the east coast of the United States, but that's what happened. So this is my first time back und ich habe alle mein Deutsch letztes Jahr irgendwo in dieser Wohnung gelassen. Sorry. What I used to do, I worked at companies like these consultancies here, also with a local company here in Sendling, and my former colleague Anna Schlesser from Studio Mem is also here. We did a lot of consulting. I spent about the last 20 years, kind of like Scott, doing a lot of consulting to these types of companies, these really big companies. So I've been mostly from a design practitioner on that side. And I guess my background is in industrial design, but I'm a terrible industrial designer. I would never hire myself to design a product. I've never actually designed a product. So then what do I do? I'll just give you an example of what that work looks like. This is a really fast one, is that I had this team this is almost 20 years ago now, it's crazy. For BMW, we were working with BMW, and it was, how can we design features for a city car? So we would start by looking at people with no idea in mind, no brand, no nothing, just simply looking at people's behavior. And there was this is a still from a video clip that we took on that high street in Milan, of a little old lady struggling to get into her BMW, right, like this, and doing this. And so on my team at that time, I had these really brilliant engineers from MIT, and they were all looking at this video going like, okay, we can carve out the top of the car, we can like maybe make a seat thing that mechanically comes up and like puts her back in, and we're going like, yeah, but the approach to that, it's kind of like you might as well be designing a dental instrument or designing like something that's not emotional. There's no emotion attached to that. So we kind of had this standoff, and it was like it got really tense, between the designers, the engineers, and so we started looking at old pictures and movie footage of people getting into and out of cars, if we really wanted to focus on that as an experience of getting into and out of a car. And this is again BMW we're talking about, and we found like. The one thing when you start looking at like Marilyn Monroe getting out of her car, like on Broadway at an opening, is that you see the paparazzi bulbs all the time. And there was something about that inspired us to start thinking about, well, the experience of like how could we create a feature that would deliver on this kind of like this feeling of glamour, and light was something that we wanted to explore. So we built a physical full-size model in foam core of a car and went to the hardware store and got some lights and then started to sketch it up and played with it ourselves one-to-one in full scale. And as we did that, it became this feature. It's a very small feature. And we presented it and was like, okay, fine, we didn't think it was gonna go anywhere, along with like the 100 other features that we did in this project. But this little feature is still in the catalog at BMW, and it's one of their, what I've been told is one of their consistently highest margin features when you select a new BMW. And I guess I tell you this because doing a kind of experience-based approach to designing something really starts with people, and as a group of marketers, which I guess you guys are, you're also going to start with people. So I was struck by some of the presentations this morning, Professor Hook kind of giving that eye chart kind of slide of where it's like engineering and then it hands off to marketing. And in fact, I think that storytelling, this kind of work, this kind of creative work, nobody owns it. It's just that there are very few organizations that are courageous enough to actually embrace working like this. And so that's why I want to talk a little bit about why I came to J&J, because at the end of every project, I would ask my teams, could you ever imagine working here? And the answer was usually like, no way, right? Absolutely not. And over the years, that was true until, I think probably until recently. where design has, people love there was a slide this morning of they want innovation, but they don't want the risk, but now we're seeing companies embrace the risk a little bit more of being creative. And we're also seeing kind of this war of talent, right? Like there's a war for talent. So it's, can we make this gorgeous cafeteria-like experience? Can we give free perks of all kinds of things to our employees to attract different people? So, you have the whole phenomenon of what's called the acqui-hire, where you have like these big companies like Facebook, Google, et cetera, buying up small design firms because they can't get the talent quickly enough. So into this, we're no different at J&J, we're very similar. So into this, like 18 months ago, I walked in, this is like I love this sign, this is a conference room in New Brunswick, where our corporate headquarters is. And I was consulting to a team, and there was something interesting about the culture of this team. They were just really nice people, they were very respectful, it was very different and they were very open to kind of looking at the world through a more creative lens. And I was like, wow, this is kind of an interesting culture for a big company. I didn't realize it would be like this. And so one thing led to another, and I kind of thought that this was another gig, but one thing led to another, and it became kind of like, well, this team who you've just kind of creative directed, would you consider leading them? And that was the offer, and I was kind of like, wow, okay, that was interesting. But kind of going into and out of their building every day, there's this thing, well, I'll just talk a little bit about J&J first. The thing is, it's a 130-year-old company, and it was founded in 1886, and it was mostly about, bandages and gauze. It started in that industry. There are about 127,000 employees in 60 countries around the world, so it's massive. And as one of my colleagues told me, yeah, we don't move very fast, but when we make impact, it's very big. So it's kind of like the challenge of a designer or a creative person in this kind of an organization is that you're trying to make the elephant dance, right? You're trying to kind of move it along, like get it out of maybe not even the 20th century, but the 19th century to the 21st century. And then, but this is a massive company. We're $71 billion in value. We have three basic divisions. Our consumer health division, so that's anything that you can buy in like what is it, like a Rossmann or something like that. Oral care, Johnson's Baby, that sort of thing is $15 billion. We have a medical device business. It's the largest, probably, medical device business in the world. Just as one of our divisions, it's $23 billion. And then pharma, our largest division, is $33 billion. I'll talk a little bit about pharma and designing for that in a minute. So there's something really quaint about this. This is the front lobby of our headquarters in New Brunswick. And when I was doing this consulting gig, I would walk by this, and this is the credo, and it was the credo of the company, and it was written by Robert Wood Johnson, one of the sons of one of the founders, in like 1947. And in it basically describes the duty that any employee in Johnson&Johnson has to fathers, to mothers, to patients, to doctors, to nurses and other healthcare professionals, to vendors and suppliers, and to shareholders. And it's all about fairness and serving them, right? So, okay, great, it's etched in stone with the American flag and Barcelona chairs, so it has it's the Holy Trinity, right? And I'm looking at that going with a very sort of ironic eye, but what I noticed as I said, the culture of the team was really open-hearted, which I really liked. And the thing was, what I found out when I became an employee is not just lip service, is that we're measured on this. So this is part of the performance review that I would have to give my team, along with all the other things, is that we're measured on how we live up to this credo. So it's actually put into our KPIs as a company. And I mean, I've consulted to some pretty impressive brands and impressive companies here and in the States and around the world, and I have not really encountered many that are aligned enough in their values to be able to, and values that I could even align with as a designer, as a creative person, to be able to kind of collaborate. So this is a really, really fundamental point, I think, as we think about doing anything, like doing anything that, given the challenges that were outlined this morning around the world that we're living in now and the amount of creativity, the amount of collaboration, the amount, just being able to do something technical, we've heard is not good enough. Being able to just tell a story or being able to effectively drill a message into somebody's head is not good enough. That these things, that the challenges that we're facing are bigger than any one of us can solve. So it's really important to have a shared common set of values that you can align with in your organizations and your teams, whether you're a big company like ours or the smallest agency. So I was brought in to be a change agent. Our whole team actually are a group of change agents. We're about 95 people. We're in Manhattan. This is a big workshop that we had. This was the project that I actually consulted on about 18 months ago, where all of our various diabetes brands and companies came together to figure out what was the future, what it was going to look like. And the thing is, though, we're swimming in tar often because there are, a company of our size, you don't even know half the people or the divisions. You don't even know the divisions, actually. It takes probably 2 or 3 years of onboarding to kind of understand where everything is. And we've mapped everything and we've looked at everything, but then until you start interacting with all of these people and all these divisions, you don't even really know what the company is capable of. So we're working on designing things like knowledge management and stuff like that. So the thing about this, I'll come back to the credo, which is that, we're talking about design thinking, right? Design thinking, design-led innovation, et cetera. And the thing is about the credo, the reason why it resonated with me, the reason why I went from being a consultant to now an in-house employee was that a lot of it is based in human-centered design. And not only was it human-centered design, which is something that I spent most of my career trying to bring to companies as a consultant, right? And particularly here in Central Europe, where there isn't that much of a tradition of it, where it's even harder because it's, here particularly in Germany, it's a very technical, very engineering-driven kind of corporate cultures that you're working in all the time. That the duty that we have to mothers, fathers, patients, nurses, doctors, and caregivers is really aligned with a lot of the principles of human-centered design. And so our group is really about care-centered design. We're designing care experiences. That's what we're in the business of doing. And we're not even delivering those experiences. We're designing them for other people to deliver, for moms to deliver, for doctors to deliver, for hospitals to deliver, for whole healthcare systems, for whole countries to deliver. So this is just excerpted. I wanted to level set a little bit because we're talking about design thinking, we're laughing at it, we think that it's all like this gauzy sort of like foosball tables and cafeterias and all this other kind of bullshit, but it's actually pretty rigorous, and we're rolling out this is part of our toolkit that we're rolling out, and we realized that it wasn't about skill sets. We all thought it was going to be like, okay, well, how do you do ethnography? How do you do synthesis? How do you do prototyping and ideation? How do you structure workshops? Those things are all knowable, those skill sets. To do them well, however, is that the mindsets have to start, right? And so there's some mindsets that are really, really important that an organization needs to adopt or needs to learn or needs to even be open to before you can even get into the skill sets and using them properly, right? So the mindsets, if you take nothing away from this slide, is that it starts with people, right? You have to start with people. You have to start by looking at people. Look at that little old lady. She led us to Marilyn Monroe and led us to these illuminated door handles, but you have to start with people, with relevance and human need first. We set up our projects by going very wide, like divergent ideas, insights, thoughts, and then we converge down into what we think is relevant, right? And then we diverge again around what we think is relevant. Well, what are the different ways in which this can be relevant, which this can be executed? And then we converge down into the way that it works. It's a different way of working than analyze and decide, which is what, look around the company that you work in, or the agency that you're in, or your clients. Look at how they work. It's analyze and decide. It's usually around data, and we go from A to B and we don't think about it. We just analyze and we decide, and it's automated. And this is the culture that we're trying to kind of open up, right? This is how, diverge and converge is how an artist works, right? It's you're putting something up there, you look at it, you respond to it, you go, not quite, and then you keep going, and you keep iterating that way. And then this idea of radical collaboration across disciplines. So this audience, how many of you are marketers, or would you self-describe yourself as a marketer? How many designers? How many technical engineering specialists would we have? Okay, so it's a kind of a mixed crowd, right? But it sounds like design and marketing. So we can all kind of preach to the choir because we're all sort of the creative folks, I suppose, or we have at least that sympathy. But I mean, some of the most creative people I've ever worked with are engineers, and they must be cultivated, sought after, and partnered with in the world that we live in, are technical engineers. I've worked with a lot of engineers who are not very creative. We know what that looks like, but there are some that are really, really creative. And so again, it's this common values that we're looking at. So this is the old saw about desirability, feasibility, and viability, right? Any innovation has to be desirable to people first, has to be technically feasible to make, and it has to be viable to the business, right? That's the sweet spot. Our teams start as, in design-led innovation anyway, I would advise anyone doing innovation to start with what's desirable, right? I mean, I love, Scott's presentation earlier where there's all this Internet of Things noise. McKinsey's going like, yeah, in 5 years, the Internet of Things is going to dominate the business landscape and it's going to be worth all this money. And people get all hopped up and excited about it, and then meanwhile, GE had been building the smart home of the future for the last 20 years, and it still hasn't arrived yet, right? Because it's just this squirrely mess of horribleness. What Scott's doing, which I love, is that he's starting with these very small experiences. What's desirable? What's relevant to me when I want to park my car, or when I want to wait in, or a relevant queuing experience? These small experiences, what's desirable, solving a need, starting with that. So we're going to roll this out in our organization. So I want to talk a little bit about one case study, a small one, and this is a not very big story, but it's an example of some of the work that we do in our studio. So we work in highly regulated industries. Even our consumer business is regulated, but the pharmaceutical industry is very regulated for very good reasons. And one of the areas that we started to see was instructions for use, the things that come with your medication, right? And nobody reads them. And you can understand why, because they typically look like this. And while as creative people, we would look at this and kind of cringe and go, God, yeah, I know that. It's horrible. It's terrible, right? Just like the navigation example we saw earlier. This has consequences. This has consequences in people not being able to take their medication properly. Maybe they're diagnosed with something where it requires them to inject themselves, right? And that can be first of all, a scary process of like needles and you have to inject yourself. And then if we're talking about a patient population who might be elderly, asking an elderly woman to inject herself, daily, weekly, monthly, whatever the case may be, is really, really asking a lot, right? And then this doesn't help. So what we tried to do was to these things have to go through a very, very strict regulatory filter, right, in order to get approved. So this was something where we knew we couldn't really spend a lot of time and energy working in isolation. We had to collaborate. So we had to, we took a patient experience approach. So what did we do? We mapped the journey of this woman, Diane. She has an autoimmune disorder, rheumatoid arthritis. She's diagnosed with it. Terrible disease that degenerates joints, right? She has a couple of kids. She has pain. She tries to relieve it by going over the counter to aspirin or things like that. Really isn't feeling good. Finally gets a full diagnosis and now is really feeling terrible. right? So we map all this stuff out on any project, what she's going through, the side effects. Oh my God, am I really ready for this? What am I going to be prescribed? Maybe there's a cancer risk in the medication that I'm going to be prescribed, because autoimmune disorders they're going to knock out your immune system, your ability to fight disease, right? So there's a lot of stuff to be weighed. These things are difficult. Weekly injections, needle fear. Am I doing it right? Right? So in doing that, we're looking at then the sort of emotional history or the emotional journey that we're on. Can we help her? What can we do for her? Can we help solve some of these big things? Can we help her build confidence, familiarize herself with this? What are the critical steps that she has to get right? So we tend to create some principles that the team would then use in designing something. I'm not going to go into all these, but the smallest behaviors matter the most in something like this. We had to have a huge collaborative group. I'm going to go through these quickly because we're running short on time. And we had to prototype and test. So the before and the after, this is what it looks like now. So this is the Symphony pen. It's for people with it's a medication that addresses 4 different autoimmune disorders. So it's pretty clear. This went through regulatory, and it's much nicer, right? We can all agree that it's nicer. It's still paper-based, but and we had to do it paper-based because of the regulatory requirements. Again, it has to be paper-based. Even if we wanted to do the nicest kind of digital app and thing that would help coach you, that's a whole different regulatory path. But I think what was really interesting is getting the feedback then from all the various stakeholders, so from healthcare professionals, from patients, doctors, nurses, were all saying, yes, this is clearly better. But I think the thing that really changed was that when the FDA, which is the big regulatory authority in the United States, looked at the instructions for use, and they started to look at the outcomes data of the complaints going down and people actually taking their medicine and adhering to it better, they decided to, they made a pronouncement saying that they would like to have everyone in the pharmaceutical space start to adopt this type of instructions for use strategy. So this little small, it might seem very small, this piece of paper, redesigning it, is now changing the regulatory landscape. Very slowly, pharma moves very slowly, but by doing well for patients and by doing well for doctors, nurses, and patients, and in these little small areas, we can actually move the needle slowly, incrementally. So I'm not going to go through all this, just simply to sum up, look at the purpose of your organization. Can you align your own purpose and other people's purpose within that organization? What would you surrender or give up to become part of that organization? We say a lot I grew up in the consulting world, right? I was like, I love the autonomy, I love working for myself. But at the same time, you're still serving your clients and you're serving the people who are on your team. So you're going to serve someone. What are you willing to give up? What are you willing to take on? What would you create that's different by joining an organization, and why? So thank you very much.